private ambulance sit there all day, but they won't.
Somebody has to sign off on it, so somebody sign off, we can leave. If they don't have a bed,
Well,
For most of them,
most of them are, yes.
we've had that discussion with them. We've had that.
No,
No, they don't call.
No, these are people.
Yesterday, because a worker there was having a seizure.
They're valid.
Gentlemen?
The problem is classification. If they do their conventional EMD, they're asking lots of questions to the hospital staff. So the reason it's classified as an inter-facility transfer is because that short circuits the EMD process.
They said, that, well, the population is moving in the doesn't really, not going to be really effective in school. Then I said, well, vice versa, the older people that are moving in are going to call them.
Tell them Mike that's supposed to go first came back. Protocols, radio shots.
But you got to, it takes
Radio
18 months, 2 years to train. I hired somebody out in the street today, and that came running, so they're all trained. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to open this work session of the Goochland County Board of Supervisors that is focusing on the Fire Rescue Strategic Plan. As a work session, this is not an official meeting of the board. No votes will be taken, nor will public comments be heard. Board members are encouraged to ask questions and engage in discussion as needed. I'll now turn over to Chief Eddie Ferguson to introduce the team that will be presenting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Eddie Ferguson, Fire Rescue Chief. It's a great pleasure today that we come before you in a workshop session to discuss and hear a presentation on the Fire Rescue Master Plan. We have Mr. Stuart McCutcheon with us from Dynamics Consulting Group, who completed a master plan for Goochland County Fire Rescue and Emergency Services. This is a long-range 10-year plan that answers 3 basic questions: where the organization is now, where does the organization need to go, and how do we get there? The plan evaluates the major aspects of the agency, benchmarks them to national standards, and then overlays priorities of the community to create a plan that is both operationally and politically acceptable. This year-long process engaged the local government, the internal and external stakeholders, and their citizens. The Fire Rescue Master Plan built upon the 2022 ISO evaluation that resulted in an award of an improved ISO protection class for Goochland County that was implemented in May of 2023. Mr. Stuart McCutcheon is a principal with Dynamics Consulting Group. He began his fire service career in 2005 and has almost 20 years of experience. He served in 6 fire departments in Florida and held the ranks of firefighter, lieutenant, assistant chief, fire marshal, emergency manager, and fire chief. Stuart served as the fire chief in the cities of Davenport, Abernathy, as well as Haines City. In addition to his fire service career, Stuart served 4 years in the U.S. Air Force as part of NORAD and Air Force Space Command. Stuart brings unique combination of education, experience, and technical expertise to Dynamics Consulting Group. Having worked in both combination and career fire departments, he possesses a demonstrated record of professionalism and a commitment to excellence. In addition to fire administration and management accomplishments, Stuart has substantially contributed to the Institution of Fire Engineers as the chair of the membership committee for the United States branch and Florida State College by developing GIS analytic tools and maps to support the missions of both organizations. He is a contributing writer to recently released 2nd edition of IFSTA Public Information Officer, and as a recent accomplishment, he has been appointed the membership committee chair of the Institution of Fire Engineers for the USA branch. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Stuart McCutcheon and he will begin the presentation. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go through it, and then certainly entertain any questions. And thank you all for this opportunity, as well as those who've are joining us in person as well as online.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can get you back up there.
Well, while he's doing that, Mr. Chair, board members, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to allow me to give this presentation today. County Administrator as well, thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it. This is really the point in these projects when we get to have the opportunity to hit the highlights and to ask some questions. And I think really you all asking questions is the part where we help clarify some different items and really gain a better understanding. With that said, as we go through this section, there's going to be an overview and there's some major components, but there's several minor components throughout this presentation. And so each minor component is probably between 3 and 5 slides. So I just ask that we hold questions until the end of the section, and each time we're about to shift gears into a different section, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions regarding that section so we can keep our flow going, but there won't be more than about 3 or 5 slides before we hit that pausing point. And so if that's acceptable to you all, we'll go ahead and get started. This is the Goochland County Master Plan. And as Chief Ferguson said, we were here a couple years ago and did the ISO benchmark study. I had worked for several years with ISO, and so we were successful in increasing your class rating without significantly increasing costs, because, you know, the thing about fires is just like having insurance on anything. It's all about your risk tolerance and how much you're willing to pay for it. You know, you could have the Cadillac plan, but it's going to cost a Cadillac price. You have a bare minimum plan, but it's not going to have any coverage, or anywhere in between. And so really the intent of this presentation is to show you all where we're at today, because if we don't know where we're at, it's tough to figure out where we're going, what the national standards are, and the gap analysis between the two. And, you know, it's okay to work towards these standards. It may take 30 or 40 years to achieve these standards. But if we know we're ultimately heading towards, we can come up with an incremental plan that doesn't break the bank, that makes sense financially and fiscally, and gives us basically the coverage that we desire for the price that we can afford. And so there's several different options in between there. Just briefly, Chief Ferguson mentioned the strategic plan. So the strategic plan, when we get to the end of this, I kind of hit highlights of recommendations at the very end. So it's not all of the recommendations, but there's, I want to say on the order of mid-40s number of recommendations. We can't do all those today, or tomorrow for that matter. May not even be able to do them in the next 5 years. That strategic planning process is where we bring in stakeholders from all groups, each segment of the fire department, from entry-level firefighter to chief, areas in between. Ideally, we have county administrative staff, finance, county manager or deputy county manager, things of that nature, so we can balance some of these ask and requests. What's a priority to one may not be possible today, but being able to have that conversation and understanding the give and take helps provide an understanding throughout the organization. And then community members. Some of our most successful strategic plans have been about 50% community members. School board, you know, Rotary, just things of that nature, because different groups have different wants and desires. And it just helps produce an understanding really across the field, increases transparency and understanding throughout the community why we're doing what we're doing. So the general overview is we're going to look at our service delivery. This is where we're at now. We're going to look at recommendations. Where could we potentially want to be? We're going to look at some next steps. These would be some intermediate items where we have some background information. So if we wanted to make a decision, we have some information to make a data-driven decision in addition to our internal knowledge. And then any questions. And so even though questions is at the end, like I said, we're going to go about 3 to 5 slides and we'll shift into a different component. And at the end of each of those sections, I'll pause and ask if there's any questions on that section. So our current fire service delivery. So we have our annual service demand. And so if we look at 2020 to 2021, let's see, what is that? That's probably just over a 20% increase. And then 2021 to 2022, you do the quick math, I'm guessing just shy of 15% increase. So we're seeing an increase year over year. Now, in speaking with Chief Ferguson, I understand that there were some events that occurred, ice storms, tornado, correct? A few other things that would have driven that demand up. Not to say artificially because it actually happened, but it would be outside the normal scope of operations. However, with that being said, My understanding is also that for 2023, we didn't have any great events. However, our service demand is nearly identical to 2022's. So what that's telling us is that even without some of these major incidents that would have driven things up, and maybe they're once in a lifetime or once every 10 years or what have you, our demand is still catching up to this level. So although we didn't see a big jump for 23, our rates are still climbing. And so what that means for us when we look at the next, when we look at our incident or our frequency type, we're about 75% EMS. And so if we're running 4,000 calls, I got the number from Chief Watkins here. I want to say it's 2,400?
2,400 transports.
2,400 transports. So, I mean, we're looking at over half of our service demand transporting, probably outside of the county in many cases. So as we're doing this more and more, we have fewer resources internally to answer our growing service demand. And really at fire rescue, there's only ever two problems. The first problem is you can't get there from here. There's simply no station around. The second is you don't have enough units in service to service the demand. You may have a station in the perfect location, but if there's only one unit, and as soon as they get on shift, they pop a call and they drive out of county, next time they pop a call, we have units coming in from other stations. And now they're out of zone and out of place. They're taking a call, probably taking a transport, and just so on and so forth. And so as you start looking at your system, when it gets really bad, it kind of looks like you've kicked an ant mound. It hits 8 o'clock at shift change, and everybody goes everywhere. Nobody's in zone for the rest of the day. We're all moving everywhere, and that's indicative of not having enough units to service the demand. Other incident types, we have fires. We're about 3%. That's a little higher than it is. I'm from Central Florida. We're about 2%, 1.5%. Most of the time, we're a little higher on EMS. But some of the things to take note of are false alarms, or good intent, or service calls. So we have 6 and 7 and 6, so let's call it about 20%. So about 1 in 5 calls are basically non-emergency calls. And so one of the things this tells us is that maybe we should look at some investments in community risk reduction, public education, and in our fire marshal's office for inspections. A 6% false alarm rate isn't horrendous, but is kind of high. Our good intent and service call rates, they're not horrendous, but they're kind of high. And so really, if you just do the quick math and you have 3 folks making, let's say, $20 an hour for the sake of argument, riding on a $750,000 piece of apparatus that we're doing the wear and tear back and forth on for 500 calls a year, if we could put somebody in that place that could help educate our public, would that cost offset? We didn't do the math in this to do that, but and it may be that you're not quite there yet, but those are just some ideas to think about, that there are some other alternatives to just putting bodies on trucks and sending them out and hoping for the best, because these folks got to get back in service. And so they don't always have the time to stay on scene for the extra 30 minutes to educate and talk to folks the way a public educator or an inspector would. When we look at our demand by station, our Station 5 and our Station 3 are our highest demand. And so when you look, these are over the 5-year period from 2018 to 2022, so don't let it confuse you on our annual numbers, because this is that number times 5. But you can see that there's a spike in those 2 stations, and it may well be that when we look at the way our calls are going geographically, when we look at our service times, we look at our estimated travel times and our actual travel times, and we start seeing some discrepancies there where they're pulling apart, that's going to be indicative of we've got a deployment issue that we need to address. With that being said, I recognize that things have changed. They're not static. We wrote this report, and it was kind of a picture in time. Things have changed since that point. And so Chief Ferguson has a PowerPoint where he can go over that if it's y'all's pleasure at the end of the presentation, if you so wish. But things have been addressed, and some of the low-hanging fruit put into place since this report. But this is just a snapshot in time. So, let's keep that in mind as well as we look through some of these. This is temporal variation. The reason we're looking at this is we want to know when are our calls happening. So, for example, we'd see that big spike in our hours in the little bottom chart there. And then we can see that Monday through Friday we're a little higher than the rest of them. And then maybe in October, it looks like about our highest month. So if we're trying to do training or hose testing or evolutions on a Friday in the middle of October during the middle of the day, and we can't get anything done because we can't stop running calls. This is the type of information we use to help say, okay, when's our lighter periods that we could schedule things? And it helps out for some of these things like training, ongoing training, maybe EMS research, things of that nature. Or another option is as you begin to become busier, 24/7 units aren't always necessarily the answer you have to go to. So I'm from Central Florida. We have this crazy spike in service demand from about October to March. About the time the love bugs come. Love bugs show up, the demand goes up, the love bugs come back, and the demand goes down. So we use things called peak demand units. So we can look at our chart and go, you know, we're busiest from 8 a.m. till 7 p. And we know where our calls are happening. If we know when our calls are happening, where they're happening, and what types of incidents these are, we can stick some folks on, say, an additional rescue or two. They run the calls during the busy periods. Maybe we run them on overtime, or maybe we use some of our new folks when we have overflow on staffing, things of that nature. And we can strategically staff as opposed to just throwing bodies at the problem and hoping for the best. With that said, you know, I think at this point, and I know you all are looking at increasing staffing in some way, shape, or form, you're pretty critically staffed at this point, so I think you do need some additional staffing, but there are also options. Not every problem needs to be solved by a 24/7 type operation. Here's your population density. So here's your big problem. You're a rural county. You're set up to be so. I believe it's 85% rural, 15% developed is the comp plan currently. And so the issue with that is it's kind of a combination of you can't get there from here, and and the demand is going to be spread out across a wide geographic area. You know, if we were at, say, the courthouse village and that was a municipality, even with the total county service demand, we could probably get away with one station with maybe 2 ambulances and an engine or something like that if we were fully staffed. We could get away with staffing that way with that demand because we're in a very compact area. We're coming across a county that's, you know, of pretty good size, and so we have to have resources out there to be able to handle that demand. So we have at least some semblance of some equality in our level of service countywide. Here's the incident count. And so in the report, I don't know that I have it in the presentation, you'll see travel times, and so basically green is good and red is bad. So when we look at travel times, we want to also compare our count of incidents. And this is what I'm talking about. We see all these green dots. So for all intent and purpose, 10 calls or less over a 5-year period on all these areas. We don't have this, except for around Station 5 and 3, we don't have a real concentrated, dense area of call volume. It's just everywhere, and it's interspersed throughout. And so many counties struggle with this, and it's usually the same problem as people are spread out. We're in a rural type area. We can't not provide services, but we need to be able to provide something that we can get some folks out to them when they need help. And also what you can do with this is there are some red areas, orange areas, and what have you for fire rescue. Begin to look at that and go, what is driving 500 calls or 100 calls a year basically in these areas? This is down to 2.5 acres. So there's a site within this 2.5 acres that's driving a lot of service demand. Can we send out a public educator? Can we send out a fire inspector to mitigate whatever this issue is and reduce our demand? It is sort of like fire protection. You know, if we put in sprinklers, we don't need, if we put in sprinklers, we don't need someone to do a fire watch. Sort of that idea, you know, how can we do alternative methods of reducing our non-emergent demand while at the same time having our resources available for the actual emergencies. And then this is our incident density. Now this isn't how many incidents actually happen. This is, we're looking at a scale, so based on the closeness of each, if they were to occur over a square mile, then you're looking at the amount of calls that would happen. And so the upper end of the scale is 160 to 170 within those white circles. The law enforcement uses this a lot when they're trying to look and locate where crimes occur. And we're looking at closeness of the incident. So if I have a break-in at 121, 123, and 125 Main Street in the last week, I'm going to throw a hot spot there. I've got a lot of activity in a very small area, and that's what this is showing us. And so the other things we can do with this is just on a quick look, look to see, are our stations in the right place? Do they look appropriately located? Well, if we look, 5 and 3 are almost right on top of our hotspots, 2 sitting on top of a spot. We can see the demand drifting down where 1 is, 6 is sitting on top of 1. I think our stations are in pretty good locations. So when we look at later some station location stuff, within the report, there's baselines and there's some things that are not in the presentation. But, you know, keeping in mind that we have many different metrics, and we don't want to hang our hat on any one of these things. What we want to do is look at these things in their totality and then take a global approach to, you know, I have, you know, let's say 5 or 6 different analyses telling me I have this problem. My confidence that these answers are correct is going to go up with the more tests I do, and the validity of those results will go up as well. And so between that and internal knowledge and political factors and everything else that goes into it, you know, I hope that, you know, be able to at least provide the data part for this to help make some data-driven decisions and help you all make the right decisions that are the most cost-effective for your communities. And let's see, I think I got my 4 and 8. So here are our projected times, and so this, you know, keep in mind this, we look and we should be able to make it almost everywhere in the county within 8 minutes. I think later we'll see that's not exactly the case. But this was generated the same way like Google Maps or Waze. This is through a company called Esri that does the GIS stuff. And so they're estimating how far we can travel based on the speed limits and the road conditions at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. And so let me pause real quick because I thought I was going to have a breaking point a little sooner. Do we have any questions before I keep going in this section? Yes, sir.
Were you suggesting that, you know, this transportation issue, the volume and so forth, that we should look at like outside contractors to?
For transport, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, at what point, you know, would we need to seek alternative?
What I would tell you is government is not in business to make money. Government's in business to provide a service. So with that in mind, we're providing these services and we're trying to provide a high level of service. And we're not in the business of making money. So just put that bucket over there. When we go to a third-party contractor, and I'll not name any names, but I've got a third-party ambulance company. If you would like, call almost any city in New England. Most of them contract for services, and I think you'll hear the same story over and over again. They're in the business of making money. They're not interested in doing good for the community. They're interested in making money. And so what will tend to happen is your low acuity calls to areas that traditionally don't have insurance or call types that are not going to be money makers, you're going to find they're not available. And if those are the types of calls you're digging out of your rural areas, you've not really done anything for yourself except for paying this contract for folks that take your high dollar calls that you would have been making the same money off of anyway. And so I think I would definitely research that first. Like I said, you could call almost any department really in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and just ask that fire chief how they feel about a third-party ambulance, and you probably get all the answers that you need. But with that idea in mind, they're there to make money. They want to do interfacility transports. They want to go to our higher-end areas that we know they have insurance. They want the high acuity calls where they can tag it as an ALS call because they're going to get about double amount of money for that transport. They're paying their folks bare minimum, running them on 8-hour shifts, and their objective is to keep these folks as busy as they can for that entire time. And that's not really the purpose of government. You know, the purpose of government is to provide a service and our citizens feel happy with it, and we're providing a good level of service because our people care. And so that's kind of the yin and yang to contracting. You know, if you've ever contracted trash services or, you know, waste services or any of those other things or seen counties that have similar problems kind of evolve where, you know, are we here to make money or are we here to provide a service? So, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before I press on?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm taking notes. You said that you thought our 3% fire was a little higher than some of your experiences in Florida. I just did some, you know, envelope math. That would be about 220 calls a year for fire if I went back to that number of whatever it was, 4,800 or so. So the preponderance of calls are medical, and that is saving lives. And I have a home, I hope, and they've already been out to see it once this week from a false alarm. I'm part of that 6% there. Sorry, guys. But I'm really focused on saving lives, and saving property is great, but I'm interested in the dynamics, how we really put a focus on making sure lives are being saved from our government services, and certainly saving property also. But I don't know if further on you get into that metric of where the emphasis needs to be on saving lives and where the costs and expenses, and I don't know, I believe ambulances don't cost as much as some of the engines that are out there. And so if you've got that, I'll be taking notes on that too.
We're going to touch on that in different ways, probably not quite that directly, but indirectly, we'll have metrics that are dancing around that. Ultimately, that's a community decision. You know, I don't pay the taxes, I don't live here, so I don't feel like it's my role to tell you all what to do so much as to say, here's the data, here's the national standard, here's some different options that would be incremental steps towards this. And then you all can debate and discuss and decide how you want to do it. But I will tell you this, our folks on running, we don't call them rescues up here, your ambulances, my home lingo's creeping in on me a little bit. So our ambulance, they're firefighters and EMTs or paramedics. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if we put one person on the engine and 15 folks on a Greyhound bus to get them there. We're trying to get firefighters to the scenes. So if a lot of time, now we have a rural water supply, which is going to be a different issue we'll touch on a little later. But in our areas with hydrants in particular, really one engine will pretty much do it for most things that we cover. We need bodies on scene. So they can come in, and so when you have systems, we're closer to 80% EMS, and so you'll see systems where the stations have one engine and 2 or 3 ambulances. And that's a pretty common, everywhere you go, one engine, 2 or 3 ambulances. We're all firefighters, but our bread and butter is EMS. We have our deployment schedule that is reflective of that. But when we need people to come in, we've got the bodies that we can pull in from the different areas, because again, it doesn't really matter the rig they're riding on. As long as we can get an engine there or 2 and we can get the firefighters on scene, that's what's important. So did I answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. So kind of leading into that, we're looking at effective response force now. And so we're staffing currently, and I know there's potentially some changes in the work, but currently we are cross-staffing engines and ambulances with 2 folks. And so the reason the 2 folks are in kind of that orangish red color is because whether you're an OSHA state or not, it's pretty well the general rule throughout the country. There's a thing called 2 in and 2 out. If you want to enter a structure, you have to send 2 people in, and there have to be 2 people outside ready to rock and roll in case something happens. All of those areas in red, there is no interior structure firefighting going to happen. By the time the next unit arrives, it's probably going to be a defensive fire, which means we're backing up, lobbing water at it from 80, 100 feet away. There's nothing left to save. And it's kind of one of those, whether it's a super expensive house or a shotgun shack, once you've burned out 40, 50, 60% of a structure, it's coming to the ground. If you've got insurance, they're going to rebuild it. If you don't have insurance, it's a loss. But either way you cut it, with not even counting the human life component, I've got a $750,000 apparatus with $250,000 of tools on it, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 worth of equipment on every firefighter that's running in and out of the place. If the building's only worth $80,000, how much do we risk to save it and to save it safely? And so the other thing to keep in mind too is that with our call volume and over half of the calls that we're taking are taking transports, those units may not even be there. So, and I'm certain there are times, because I've been here at times when we're running out of units. There are no more units, and Chief Ferguson's jumping in his car and running out there to grab a call. We don't have any units left to service the demand. And so even though on the map, and this is the best case scenario, everybody's in quarters and ready to go, we're rocking and rolling during the middle of the day when you see that spike. I mean, there could potentially be nobody out there. So now we're not talking 8 minutes to get out there, it may be 15 or 20 minutes. And when we get to our performance, we'll be able to see how that plays out. In our areas over by Short Pump, we have a much better response. Around Station 1, we have an area where we get 6 folks there within an 8-minute predicted travel time. But that's where a lot of our commercial growth is occurring as well, so that's good. Later, we'll also look at some station location items because we can see that we have some, areas where we still can only get 2 folks into commercial type properties. And if we want to attract business and do some of those things, we probably want to make sure that we can at least provide some level of protection should something occur. All right, I guess I jumped the gun. We only had that one slide. We're going to now go into response continuum. I'll just pause one more time and ask if we have any questions before I go into performance. Okay, so when we're looking at performance, in total, we have a total response time. This is what our folks dialing 911 experience. This is from the time you hit 911 send to the unit shows up on scene. And a lot of things happen in between that. When you call 911, it goes to our dispatch center. Our dispatch run through their either emergency medical or emergency fire process to get to their determinant, and they dispatch a unit. So from the time they receive the call to the time they dispatch the unit, that's called call processing up at the top. From the time it's dispatched until that rig begins to roll out the door is called turnout time. And from the time the rig rolls out the door until it arrives on scene is travel time. There's also a thing called response time, and in volunteer systems, the national standard that deals with that deals with response times, not turnout or travel, and so that's why this is up there. But if you hear the term response time, that's the time from when they were dispatched till they arrive on scene. And so it's made up of turnout and travel time. And then altogether, we're at the total response time. The reason this is important is that internally within the fire department, a lot of times, we'll be able to tell you our turnout times, and we'll be able to tell you our travel times. But what we're probably not so familiar with is our call processing times. And I'll just tell you a brief story of why this is important. So the last department I was chief at, we had 2 or 3 calls in a row. They're fairly critical calls. The call came in, we were standing in the bay, we jumped directly in the truck. It was a half mile down the road. We were there and on scene in nothing flat. But when we got on scene, the people were as mad as they could be because they said, we've been waiting 12, 15 minutes for you to get here. Where have you guys been? We were on the phone forever. You never came, you never came, you never came, and then you finally came at the end. And what we discovered was our call processing component, the more complicated it was, it's a decision tree. The more complicated it was, the more questions they had to ask. The more questions they asked, the longer it took. So for things like slip and fall in front of the grocery store, it might take 30 seconds. If you are a non-English speaker in cardiac arrest and there was a fire anywhere near you, it may be 10 minutes before that first unit is even notified of an emergency. And so that's why it's important to keep track of all these different components. For turnout time as well, turnout time is rarely a compliance issue with employees. Sometimes it is. But most of the time, especially if you're looking at a fire, I don't know too many firefighters that tone goes off for fire. We're not out the door. I mean, that's what we live for. We're as quick as we can get out the door. But there are other factors, station design, cross-staffing units, just setup of the fire station. Are they all the way in the back and upstairs and have to transverse, and it takes them 60 seconds just to get down to the bay floor? There's all kinds of different things that go into that. And so as much as anything, tell you this when we start talking about station location later, that station design plays a critical part in turnout time, and we have control of things like station design. And so it's something that we want to be cognizant of as we're doing those items, should that come up. Now, as we get into this as well, these times are going to be measured at the 90th percentile. And so what I want to do real quick is just hit a brief statistics lesson for anybody that isn't familiar with that. So we have average versus 90 percentile. Forever, everyone's used average in fire. And it seems like average would be an appropriate thing to use. However, averages are very susceptible to outliers. And so here's an example. I have 10 turnout times. The first 9 I turn out in 1 minute. The last one, we were flowing water up in the aerial and doing a tanker shuttle operation. We had the whole training thing going on, and it took us 11 minutes to break everything down to the point where that first unit could break loose and go. Well, my median, or 50th percentile, would be 1 minute. My mode, or the number that appears the most, would be 1 minute. Even my 90th percentile would be 1 minute, but my average would be 2 minutes. That one number swings it way out, and so the way you tell is, if we have what we have here, we have a normal distribution of a data set, and we have the symmetry on both sides, average is the appropriate metric. But in fire rescue, we have a positively skewed distribution. Everything's shifted to the left up near that axis. And so the reason for this is we're trying to get out the door as quickly as we can, or we're trying to get there as quickly as we can. And we'll kind of hit that peak at the mode where we have our most answers, and then we start tapering down to our average or our median or 50th percentile. And then as we start tailing out towards the end, we finally have hit our average. And you can see just from that example there how that average will spread out on you using that. We don't have symmetry within our distribution, and so that's why NFPA 1710 and 20 and CPSC, who does accreditation, and ISO, and all these different organizations use the 90th percentile, because that's a more appropriate metric to use to describe the performance. And so basically what we're saying, you can think of it one in two ways. Either 90% of the time we're going to do this good or better, or we're going to accept that 10% of our calls that we ran were outliers. Something weird happened, and we shouldn't count those in the data set, so here's what we can do, or better. And so either way you want to think about it, I think is correct. But when we look at these are 90th percentile. So when we're looking at these numbers as well, if you've ever seen the averages or their averages have been reported, what you're going to find is it's probably going to be about 40% higher when we get to the 90th percentile, which kind of makes sense, right? If we have a normal distribution on our data set and the median, the mode, and the average are all the same number, if I go out to and that's the 50th percentile, if I go out to the 90th, it's about 40%. And so you're going to see that reflective in these numbers. So I just want to warn you so nobody goes into heart palpitations as we go into this next section. But with that, does anybody have any questions before I move on to into performance? Yes, sir.
When you are talking, and sometimes you'll throw out a term that, like you said, it's kind of inside baseball to you. Board members and our citizens may not always understand it, so if you could try to kind of explain maybe NAFTA and things like that occasionally, that would probably help people.
Okay. So the NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association, and they are pretty much the only institution in the country that produce fire rescue standards. They're written by mostly fire chiefs that are elected to a committee or a board. So, for example, for 1710 that covers career departments, my buddy Dave Downey from Miami-Dade, he retired as the chief there. He's on 1710 now. We have some folks from, I can't remember if he's still on there or not, maybe Loudon, Fairfax. I know there's some folks from Fairfax. But we have folks from all over the country, and they get together to try to develop these performance standards, and they're based on things like, how quickly should an ambulance get on scene? Well, after 4 minutes, we look at that cardiac survival rate, and it drops like a rock. So that's where that 4 and 8 minutes come from on the cardiac, and it just so happens, with fire, it's pretty close, so they went ahead and made them the same as well. And so 1710 is the one that covers the career departments. As you go through the report, we have a whole explanation of all that and where we're pulling everything from. But that's what we're basing this on. And again, whether you're looking at the NFPA or you're looking at ISO or CPSC for accreditation, they're all using the same standard. There are other accreditation models out there for, say, EMS, for emergency dispatching, and a few other things related to that, but they're very process-oriented. There's no there's no performance standards associated. They were looking at policies, procedures, administrative, HR, things of that nature. So administratively, you're good to go, but they don't provide performance standards. NFPA is really the only one that does provide the performance standards to say, hey, here's a national benchmark. Most do not meet them, and it's not a requirement. It's just something to shoot for. Ultimately, I think the thing to do is look at your times and look at your performance and determine, is this acceptable for myself and my community? If it's not, let's talk to our fire chief and say, how do we get it down to whatever is acceptable? We evaluate the cost and then determine, are we going to do it today? Do we do it down the road, or we not do it at all? And I think really that's the best approach to go. That 1710 is really just giving us an idea of what would be ideal, but not everything's ideal in the world. So our call processing. So remember, this is at the 90th percentile. So for and EMS makes up about 75% of our call volume. So if we're just thinking 75% is EMS, our EMS total and our total are going to be really close because EMS is such a large volume of our total calls. So for fire, our call processing time's a little under 4 minutes, same with EMS. Hazardous conditions a little bit higher. It almost always is because they're usually kind of complicated and complex, trying to figure out what's going on initially. Our false alarms are a little faster, mostly because they're probably going to a central station, which would be the little hub that answers your alarm call and calls the fire department. And then we have our total, which is pretty close to our EMS time. Now, is there room for improvement? Certainly. But in the grand scheme of life, as we bounce all across the country, these aren't bad times. You know, again, they could be better, but I wouldn't call this bad by any stretch. And so there may be opportunities. Chief, do you do pre-alerting? We do. So they're doing pre-alerting. So this is to the final determinant when they actually dispatch. Doing the pre-alerting, they're cutting this down significantly. And so what that means is, let's say I call 911 and I say there's a fire at 123 Main Street. There's going to be this decision tree that I spoke of to get to a thing called the final determinant, which tells me how many units do I need, how many resources do I need, do we need to call mutual aid, do we have the right folks going on the initial alarm. They have these things called boxes, and different units and different people come in the different boxes depending on where they are on the map. They're trying to figure all that out. With the pre-alert, you go, there's a fire at 123 Main Street. They pre-alert fire 123 Main Street, and then as these folks are en route, they'll give them the final determinant later. So again, even though this looks like a scary number, it's not nearly as bad as it looks. And I just want to make sure I get that out there so our comm center guys and the sheriff don't hunt me down later. But even without the pre-alerting, in the grand scheme, it's not bad performance. Oh, and NFPA for that is 60 seconds. Turnout time is also 60 seconds for EMS. It's 80 seconds for fire and special operations calls. And so this is the one that really stands out at me. 4 minutes and 48 seconds at the 90th percentile to respond to a fire. I don't know too many folks that aren't moving as quickly as humanly possible to go to a working fire or a brush fire, or any fire for that matter. I think this is going to be indicative of cross-staffing units. The call goes out, I have to make my way to the bay, make my way to the apparatus, grab my bunker gear, walking across the bay, put it on the truck. I walk back over here, grab our med gear, because especially we have ALS, we can't leave that stuff laying around. Walk it back over to the truck. I walk back over, grab my MDT, walk it back to the truck. Walk over and make sure I got the stuff we need, walk it back to the truck. Walk around the truck, make sure it's ready to go. It's a time-consuming process. It's cheaper to staff 2 folks, but your performance is going to suffer by doing so. And by the performance suffering, our outcomes are going to suffer. And then, additionally, we basically cleared out that whole zone. So as soon as that, say, Station 6 or Station 4 respond to that fire, there's nobody left. There's nobody left to come in to cover them. It's either mutual aid or we're coming from short pump to get over there, which is going to be, 25-minute drive in some cases. So I know that there's some progress that's been made, and I think Chief Ferguson can speak to that much more succinctly and clearly than I can about the current progress. But this turnout time, sort of your point about do we need additional ambulances, we can see what's happening with our performance based on the way we've chosen to deploy. Now, our EMS is faster as 3.5 minutes. That's still a long time. The other thing that's going to occur, because I've seen it myself a couple of times here, these men and women are in an ambulance driving down the road to go get fuel or whatever it is they're going to do, and they get a fire call. So they have to turn around, drive 2 or 3 miles back to their station to get to the engine and do the thing I've already described, to jump in the engine to drive right back. So just like insurance, we have to decide, is this level of service acceptable for our community and our citizens? Travel time performance. Now remember before we looked, and we had pretty good predictive coverage at 8 minutes. We looked and we said, we should be able to make it just about everywhere in the county in 8 minutes. But when we look, and to be honest with you, when we do have good coverage, our performance will match very closely with our predicted. But we're up at around 14 minutes for fire, 12 and a half minutes for EMS for travel time. So this is the time they leave the station until they arrive on scene. What this is telling us is there are probably not enough units to service the demand. We're dumping an area, and because of the remoteness and ruralness, say Station 4 goes out, then either 6 or 3 or somebody else has to come from a distance away. It's driving those travel times up. And so when we look across the board, EMS is a little better at 12 and a half minutes, but the rest of them, and in total we're at 12:45. So pretty much we can say, now granted, we could get there faster if we're in town, but at our 90th percentile, we're about 4 times the national standard. And so the national standard is 4 minutes, probably not achievable for a county of your size, nature, and makeup. But I think the thing to do is to say, what would be acceptable? And how do we get there from here? And if we, as a fire chief, if I know what you're shooting for, I can come up with some ideas of how to get you there and estimate some cost and things of that nature. So that way we're doing the best we can with our resources and we're improving our performance and things of that nature. Because if you're in cardiac arrest, stroke alert, major trauma, house is on fire, there's nothing we can do for you if it took us 14 minutes to get there. Response time, so this is from the time we were dispatched to the time we arrive on scene. About 15 and change across the board. With fires a little more at 17 minutes. Again, if we're at all concerned about outcomes, I think, you were either gonna make it or you won't, or you weren't probably by the time we get there if it takes us that long. And again, we could get there faster, and 89% of the time we are getting there faster. But when we're looking at the standard, this response time should be closer to 5 minutes. And then finally, total response time. And so this is the time for you to call 911 until that first unit arrives on scene. And it kind of speaks to the story I told earlier about where have you guys been. We're between 17 to 20 minutes. That's a long time waiting on help to arrive. Even if we cut that in half at 10 minutes, that's still a long time waiting on help to arrive. And, in looking at your data, and there's a couple things we'll hit a little later, I think there's just only having 1 unit per station with 2 folks is what's doing it. I think if we were able to staff an engine and staff at least 1 ambulance at each of the stations, we're going to improve that performance significantly because we'll have that unit there. If the ambulance goes, at least the engine can get on scene and initiate care. If the engine goes, at least the ambulance can show up on scene and start initiating incident command and calling resources and staging. The other major thing that we have here in Goochland is rural water supply. And so when we did ISO, I can't remember what we were shooting for, 600 gallons a minute or something? Something like that. And then we ended up flowing about, 14 or 1,500 gallons a minute? So by, I did a lot of rural firefighting too in my background. So we kind of put our heads together and came up with a game plan on how to do this. And we really could flow a lot of water. But it's very labor intensive. If you're running 4 tankers, there's 4 folks right there. So that's 2 of your stations. And then we need 2 in and 2 out. And there's another 2 stations. And then we probably need an incident commander and maybe somebody operating the pump. That's everybody you got in the county. We've just used every person that we have, and we really only have 2 people inside fighting a fire or doing whatever. So, again, we're pretty critically staffed. We can get the job done. These folks are doing a good job. But is that the level of service that's appropriate for our community today and moving into the future? And that's a decision for you all and your constituency base. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pause and answer any questions, go back and cover any slides that you all would like.
Yes, sir. I so appreciate the statistical approach. Do they have standards for rural-based counties versus national averages? I'm thinking, I've spent some time in Kansas, and you can go a fur piece from
At least.
Wichita out to McCutcheon Farm is going to be a piece. And I've been told people, when they move to Goochland, realize we're much more of a rural county. In the draft, back on page 175, 72% of the respondents, what do you feel is the appropriate amount of time from a person calling 911 until firefighters and EMFs? And they said 5 to, let me make this right, 5 to 15 minutes. So 72% of the respondents are saying they're maybe okay with this. I'm still coming back to, I want to save lives, and I can refer to a doctor in the audience as to how long it takes, he's a heart doctor actually, as to how that 4 minutes is pretty critical. So how do we get more EMS on site and save lives? And in your comment that after so many minutes, we're going to save a foundation, we're not going to save a house. So, yeah, the community standards, how do we get a better understanding based on the information in this report? That we got 72% of the people saying if you can get there between 5 and 15 minutes, we're okay with that.
Well, I think it kind of depends on your dynamic as well. You know, folks that live in the more urbanized part, you know, if I live in town, I kind of expect municipal services, whether I'm a county resident or a city resident or what have you. You know, it's just kind of the way it goes. So I think, you know, if you're living in a more urbanized area, you probably expect a higher level of service than if I'm living 15 miles from the nearest stop sign. So I think that's a balance, and that's something that just talking to your folks in your community and just, you know, the areas you represent to determine, you know, if folks out on the West End are happy, then, you know, that's something to take into consideration. If folks on the East Side are unhappy, that's something to take into consideration too.
Might be able to help you with that
oh,
just
yes,
a
sir.
little bit, Mr. Lyles. You know, a few years ago, we developed EMS response time standards, and we probably are due for a revision of the EMS response time standards because we're doing much better than what their standards were set for. But we took the county, we looked at it, we tried to figure out that the fact that you had a, you know, the rural area, the large geographic area, from basically Jackson Shop Road 522 to the west is one zone, and then we have from that to the east. And our EMS response time standards was 20 minutes for the western end of the county, and then was 15 minutes for everything east. And that's kind of in a policy. We do much better than that today. And we developed that over 10 years ago as a mandate from the Virginia Office of Emergency Medical Services. We had to develop response time standards, and at the time, that's what we came up with. But while we do much better than that, certainly that gives you the idea that in the rural area of the county, response times are going to be lengthier than they are in the more densely area of the county. And of course, our resources, on-duty resources, will impact that as well as far as resource availability goes. So that might be helpful with, you know, some things here in the county that we've looked at, in particular to emergency medical services. So, thank you.
If I could just interject real fast,
Yes, sir.
we're about halfway through, so just please keep track of the time.
So our future demand projections, some of your key commercial developments are construction, corporate services, finance and insurance, food and beverage, healthcare, life sciences, and logistics. And those are your types of industries moving in that you're trying to attract. Here's one of the maps from, I believe, your comp plan, just showing generally where some different developments are going to occur. Residential development, Courthouse Village is going to probably continue to develop to develop as one of your city centers, as well as Centerville Village. It will probably continue to develop in some way, shape, or form. Population projections, so use 3 of them because these are kind of crystal ball type of stuff, but we use the University of Virginia, a linear one from the U.S. Census, and then Esri, who's the GIS who I use to build all these things with, their projections. And so February 28, 2024, at about 26,500 folks. So, you know, I think we're kind of tracking in that direction. And the reason this is important is because when we're trying to estimate demand, we used a per capita approach to say for every 100 people or every 1,000 people, we can expect this many calls for service. And so with that, we can look, and as we stretch out to 2050, we've nearly doubled what we were at in 2020. And so the resources we have today are likely not going to be sufficient for the demand we're going to experience tomorrow. Not to say that we have to do something about it tomorrow, but we should at least be cognizant of it and begin planning for the future to make sure that our services are growing with our community. Any questions real quick before I go into some different options for consideration?
Yeah, I was hitting on your remarks previously when you were talking, it seemed to me we're putting a fair amount of stress on our people with two in a station, and one of the things I picked up in going through this thing is one ought to be priority would be the health of our employees. Later on, you're gonna talk about cancer-causing things and stuff like that, and what we can do to reduce that threat. But how about the stress on the employees having to, be torn between, the fire calls and the rescue calls, the EMS calls, and having to take additional time to get geared up to get that engine rolling or that piece rolling?
I think where you can see that is your recruitment and retention. Just look at your recruitment and retention numbers. People don't leave organizations because of money typically. Otherwise, nobody'd be in the military, nobody'd be in law enforcement, nobody would be a county manager. Because some of these jobs are just tough. You do it because you love it, not because of the benefits you get from it. But if people feel like they're being taken advantage of, or they're just stressed and it's affecting their lives, then yeah, you're going to see them start to hop. So, I would defer to the fire chief on some of those statistics on that, but I'd say that'd be the place to start, is recruitment and retention. If we can't get folks to apply and we can't keep the folks we've got a problem in there somewhere, and that's going to be a component of it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
One of the biggest challenges I see with the maps is higher population density and much lower population density, and trying to, find a solution without the obvious answer, which is everybody expects a call in the exact same amount of time. I don't care if you live in the furthest point west of the county or the, more highly populated area. So it just, how do we address that as a rural county that has population coming in on the eastern side?
Well, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I think you talk to your folks in the areas. There's basically two different lines of thought. Everybody pays the same amount. Everybody should have the same service. It's going to cost a small fortune. Or we take the limited resources that we have and we do the most good for the most people. And so that's more the camp I'm in, not debating whether or not it's right, wrong, or indifferent. But I think that's probably the answer. Our folks in rural areas, if I've got a place out 20 minutes from the closest stop sign, I'm going to expect it's going to take a while to get there, more than likely. Whereas if I'm living in a condo and there's shopping centers all around me, I'm expecting services, pretty regularly. So I think that's part of the balance. You can't get there from here problem going on. But, there's a couple different options. You could have maybe they have things called super stations, where just one of the rural stations, kind of centrally located, might have 3 or 4 units at it, and that's what's backfilling everything else around it, so we don't have to build multiple buildings. Opening additional stations would help with that. Having dedicated crews on an engine and an ambulance, so we have 2 units running out of a station, would help significantly. That's probably a good place to start. So there's 100 different right ways to do it. It's just landing on what's the right way for you all.
I tend to object that there's 100 different right ways to do it. I think there's one right way to do it. My question would be, who has broken the mold to date? And is any solution that we're looking at breaking the mold, so that we're trying to find something that, honestly, we're dealing with insurance issues, we're dealing with mortality issues, all these things, but I want to do it in the most clever way and creative way instead of the bureaucratic way. So are we doing that and looking at it in that way?
I think to some extent, and that's what we're trying to do with the master plan, is provide some information so you all can help select that angle. So to give you an example, now I was in a city, and a city is not a county. And I don't know that this is necessarily work for a county, because if we ever ran into a transport issue with this, we'd be dead in the water. But I took 8 folks, so 2 vehicle, and stuck them in pickup trucks with a cap on the back, slide out for their bunker gear, water can, and that sort of thing. I could buy the truck for 50 grand, get the slide out in the cap for another 2. So for just over 50 grand, I got a truck that's going to run 7 to 10 years, gets real good gas mileage, can zip around, go faster. And we went through and identified all of our calls with a 75% or less chance of transport rate, and they went to all of those. So our ambulance only went to the calls that we felt like were going to be transports by the nature of the call, and statistically proved that. Our engines only went to calls that they were either needed or as a fire call or something to that effect. And our folks in the pickup trucks ran everything else. So, I mean, that would be an example of different ways to do it. And, I said there's 100 different ways to do it. Across the country, there's all kinds of, Kansas is a different animal than Miami-Dade, which is a different animal than where I'm from, and here as well. So just depending on where you're at, there's different ways to do things, and there's a lot of different inventive ways. It's just, what's the way that's going to work best for you all? And I would lean on my fire chief for that. Any other questions? All right, so some options for consideration. So we went through, there's more modeling within the report, but just for the sake of presentation to kind of give you the background of what we did. So this would be another example of something. I wouldn't hang my hat on this one item, but it does provide us some good information on impact based on historical data. So basically what we've done here is taken our existing 6 stations, and then we have that station 7 that's proposed and I believe underway. And we're going to use this as a baseline. So we're just under 78% for our 2022 incidents. So for an 8-minute travel time, the reason we used 8 minutes, there's a lot of studies out there that say in rural transport systems that 8 minutes or 4 minutes, there's really no difference in outcomes. And so because there's not a difference in patient outcomes, they all kind of conclude that 8 minutes travel time is the appropriate time to use when trying to locate stations. And so we used 8-minute travel time, so we're at about 78%. We moved to 8 stations, so we're opening up there in Sandy Hook. Yep. We're increasing about 6% performance. So now we've added a unit to the center that can move west, they can move east, they can cover the center, and so it kind of makes sense in that central why a station would appear there. And so now we've improved our performance that much more. Just for the sake of argument, we're kind of getting out to the crystal ball range at this point, but based on the data, we add an additional one. We only picked up about 3% with this, and so with this modeling too, we want to look at, we're going to start having diminishing returns. It's way too early to start planning 9 stations a day, but if we look at this and we have this study, and then maybe in a few years, you do another one, and you do another one, we keep seeing the same patterns, our confidence in the answer and our validity will increase. And so that's why it's good to have these, so you can look at the historical perspective and say, hey, we keep seeing this location pop over and over again. Probably a pretty good location for a fire station. So recommendations overview, this is just kind of high-level stuff. As we're transitioning from a volunteer to a combination to really more of a career department, because if we just look at volunteerism nationwide, whether we're talking firefighters, Rotary, Boy Scouts, what have you, it's down across the board. Probably need to look at rolling our volunteer positions that are doing administrative and work and things like that nature to a full-time position at some point. Each station should probably have an officer at it, some type of supervisor in a role to make sure, especially as we start getting more folks into these stations, make sure everything's functioning the way it's supposed to. Bad things happen at stations where there's no supervision. There's some counties in Central Florida where you can Google search them and find out some horror stories. Cross-staffing, eliminate cross-staffing. Our performance should improve. National standards for firefighters on engine and any kind of aerial, so like a ladder, 2 or 3 on an ambulance, depending on which thing you're kind of looking at the moment. But we may not get there today, we may not get there in 10 years, but that would be the national standard. Increase our number of inspectors to increase the inspections that we're doing, reduce our false alarm calls, and help out with some education to the community and to our businesses. A full-time instructor. This county is way too big and way too spread out and way too lean to have someone trying to drift around because we can't take a unit out of service. So I show up to Station 6 and they pop a call as soon as I get there. So I drive 15 minutes over to Station 4 and they pop a call. So I drive 15 minutes over to Station 5 and they pop a call. You spend all your time driving around because we can't take anybody out of service. We're just so lean. We can't afford to take units out of service for training. And so as we begin to advance into the future, that's something probably to be on the radar, that we probably need somebody in training and safety so we can look at things like, are we doing things correctly? Are there things we could be doing better? Do we have major safety violations occurring? There's some departments in the Northeast. They have 4 and 5 folks in training and safety now who traditionally had none until they started killing people. And it's just they never realized they were doing things unsafe until they got some outside eyes in. Public educator position. This will help you out on your ISO. It'll help you out on your risk reduction. It'll help you out on your education. It helps in all kinds of areas. They educate your senior folks. They go meet with your businesses. They go to your schools. They do all these different things. Educator position is really important within a fire department. Just like with prevention, they're not the ones out in front getting all the glory, but they're doing a lot of work in the background because not for nothing, 3% was not the number you would have seen 30 years ago on the number of fires in a county of this size. The number's going down because of fire prevention and of public education. And then continue to work on recruiting and retaining new volunteers. The only caveat to that is we have, just like some of these other things, we have to look at the point of diminishing returns. If we're trying to staff a class of 20 and we end up with 1, and we look at $4,000 in bunker gear and $3,500 for a class and $2,500 in overtime and all the staff time training them, and they go work for Enrico 6 months later, or Enrico, I'm sorry, 6 months later. We got to kind of weigh out the juice with the squeeze on that. Single logistics facility, there is 0 storage space in your fire stations, and there's nowhere to put anything else, and this stuff is jammed into every cubby hole and cabinet and crawl space that they have. And it's spread across the, spread across the county. And so it doesn't have to only be fire rescue. You know, you may be able to combine it with some other things, but there needs to be a facility where someone can go to get the things they need and store items, and we can know where everything's at and have some accountability so we can access items quickly and not go from station to station trying to remember where that size 44 long bunker coat went. Training facilities kind of in the same nature. It needs some TLC. Work on a plan for the number and location of fire stations. We've already addressed that a little bit. Look at increasing the size of our apparatus fleet. Now that may be ambulances. It could be the pickup truck example. It could be any number of things, but landing on a plan of how do we proceed forward and moving forward. And again, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. It may be 5 years from now, but at least beginning to have that discussion and conversation of how do we get where we want to be. And then finally, a vehicle replacement plan. You know, we're running apparatus 20, 30 years and they're running into the ground. It seems like a big ticket item when you go, wow, you know, $500,000, $750,000 for an engine, but the engines are running 20, 25 years. We look at a deputy's car, what are those Chargers running? 25, 30 grand a piece, buy 7 a year. Every 7 years we're replacing them. If you do the math, it works out just the same for the same number of people for an engine versus deputy cruisers over the same time period, or just not exactly the same, it's real close. It's just a big, scary number. But all it's going to take is one crash where we have an under-maintained apparatus that plows through and takes out a minivan, and pretty much any savings we would have had are going to disappear with that. And then just a couple of more performance standards Chief spoke to, reviewing those, updating them, setting some goals of what we would like to see, how do we get there, and what are the options to do it. And then an annual report, just so you all and the community can stay abreast of what is our performance. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Or what's happening with our system? And then I'll just pause briefly real quick. Are there any questions before I jump into this last bit?
Yes, sir. You touched on a couple of things that certainly got my attention. One, you talked about dedicated units. And also you said something about eliminating cross-staffing. And I believe Chief could confirm this, or any of them, that our folks are fully cross-trained right now. We have EMS and firefighters. They can do both. Mm-hmm. Are you suggesting that we could, not should, but could look at simply having EMS and just have firefighters? And is that what you meant by eliminating cross-staffing?
No, sir, I mean, so if you and I are at a station, if an ambulance call comes in, we move all our stuff off the engine onto the ambulance, and we
Yes.
take off. And we come back to the station, we get a fire call. We move all our stuff off the ambulance, back onto the engine, and we go on the fire call. And then we come back. And then maybe we have 2 or 3 EMS calls, and then we move back to the engine. That hopping back and forth is what's driving our turnout times up, or one of the contributing factors. Or if we're in the ambulance and we're driving back to the station, or we're out getting fuel or supplies or what have you, and we get a fire call, we're gonna have to turn around and drive back to the station to move all our stuff over to take off in the engine. And so that's hurting our performance.
I'll give
It's-
you a
so-
little bit of help on that,
Sure.
Stuart. You know, we have our personnel on duty, dual role employees, they can handle fire or EMS. If you look at the call breakdown, about 75% bumping 80% EMS, and about in the 20s are fire. So we can have, whether there's a volunteer or a career member, if they're trained in both disciplines, then if either call they can handle. The cross-staffing piece is when we have 2 or 3 people on duty and we do not have independent staffing on each unit, and personnel have to switch between vehicles or have to make that decision-making choice of, do I take the fire engine or do I take the ambulance on the call that could require both resources for the same call. Vehicle accident is an example of that, or a house fire with a person trapped or person injured would require both. So I think, you know, the dual role employee or volunteer that is cross-trained in both fire and EMS is a different situation than the cross-staffing. The cross-staffing definition is sometimes referred to as first pull, where basically we handle whatever call comes in first. And what I have talked to you all about and conveyed in the budget presentation is my concern is that most often it's an emergency medical services call. And so that ambulance will leave the jurisdiction and do some of those 2,400 transports that we did in 2023 that Chief Watkins alluded to. And now we don't have personnel left behind to handle the next emergency medical service call or the fire call. And so that's the thing, you know, the ambulances go out of the jurisdiction. We have a fire call because we have the same workforce, volunteer and career, doing both jobs. We are a fire rescue organization. We do emergency services. And in my opinion, that is what's carried us the furthest all these years, is because we have always been resourceful. It was set up that way back in the 1960s when EMS or rescue squads or first aid started integrating into the fire service. The decision was made that we would be fire and rescue. And that has given us the most resources at the best value to be able to do both jobs in one building. And in some localities you go to, you see fire station on one side of the road or a rescue squad on the other side of the road. That's not us. That's not who we want to be, and that's not what's good for business and for our members that we're serving. So hope that answered the question. The cross-staffing thing is really moving between units because you have too few people on duty to handle independent staffing. I think I had mentioned that, you know, certainly I did, that our goal, and we have to see what your thoughts are, is that we would have a minimum of 5 people on duty in a station, 3 assigned to the fire engine, and we would have 2 assigned to the ambulance. And then we could handle both units to the same call if that's what was required, or potentially we could handle more than one call at a time. So I hope that helps. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman? I appreciate that, Chief and Stuart. You would also mention super stations, and it's almost serendipitous or by accident that right now in Sandy Hook, all we have is an EMS station, and every bit of information I have says it's doing its job and saving lives. So we're still running, I'm going to say out of 5 or maybe 6. If there's a fire incident, those 2 stations are most likely going to respond to that. So I just heard Chief say that we don't want to be a scenario where we would only have EMS, that we would always want to have fire and rescue in the same building.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sort of seeing an incident or a scenario where having only EMS is doing some pretty good stuff. And so I know the plan is to make Sandy Hook both fire and rescue, but in the interim, and again unapologetically focused on saving lives over property, is there a benefit that we would look at satellite EMS stations with the superstation being equipped to do both. And that's a question. I'm here for information.
Well, I'm sorry, the way we got started in Sandy Hook was we had the roundabout construction, and there were delayed response times in the Sandy Hook area of the county. And so putting an ambulance there, we only addressed, one service that we offer. But what I will tell you is the folks who ride that ambulance are also firefighters, and they also respond to fire calls. And certainly that ambulance has arrived first on a couple of house fires in that area. And as you alluded to, we do have plans to expand the service in Sandy Hook so that we can provide both services. That ambulance is making a big difference in Sandy Hook. It's making a huge difference in Sandy Hook, but we also need to get that fire resource there in Sandy Hook also so that we can go back to our model where we have fire and rescue. Certainly, if there was only a fire engine there, it would be used less frequently than an ambulance, but I could stand here and tell you that it arrived first on several house fires that it was closer to, but that's not available today. And I'm hoping that, as we take steps, which we are taking steps to get, even in a temporary quarter fashion, where we would have a fire engine in Sandy Hook as well as an ambulance. And then the new fire station is in our CIP and the outer years of our CIP to build for Sandy Hook. But both needs exist in that same community. And I certainly appreciate your EMS focus, and certainly that is about 75–80% of the business, but there is a fire need in Sandy Hook also.
And again, my last question is you've mentioned at least twice moving equipment from the ambulance to the fire truck and from the fire truck to the ambulance. I'm not one to go out and increase material or equipment costs, but would there be a benefit in having that individual, that EMS firefighter, having equipment on both vehicles, and then they don't have to move it back and forth? I don't know what the expense on that would be. You just opened your eyes really wide, so I guess that would be a lot.
Well, part of the major issue of that is we have drugs on the trucks because we're running advanced life support, and so there's a checkout in the chain of custody and all those things. So that would be probably the biggest thing moving. Our MDTs would be the next big issue. Bunker gear is going to be $4,000 a piece, give or take. The air pack should already be on the truck. I would say it sort of fits in the same way with your question about should we go like a single cert EMS versus a firefighter, EMT, or a fire medic. I don't know what the pay scales are off the top of my head in this area. I know in my area, a single cert medic is probably going to make about 45 starting out. Dual cert firefighter, EMT is probably going to make about 52. So are we really saving, for the $6,000 to $8,000, are we really saving all that much?
I think the question, though, is more concerned what's being moved between vehicles. And what's being moved between vehicles are personnel, and they take their personal protective equipment between vehicles, which is increasing their response time in some situations. And so as Mr. McCutcheon said, a set of bunker gear is, by the time you buy the complete set, is between $5,000 and $6,000 a person, whether you be a volunteer or a career member. And so when you have to move your equipment between units, we're not moving tools, okay? We're moving personal protective equipment, and personnel is switching to the other vehicle. It adds to the response time. But the bigger problem there is the other vehicle may also be needed on the same emergency, but we can't take it because we don't have enough personnel. So we are very fortunate in this county, and I want to thank you all for that in previous boards, that you have given us the tools and the equipment and the apparatus to work with. And while some of our vehicles do fit the mold of being older in age, I can tell you that most all of those have a replacement vehicle on order that we just certainly can't receive in the time that we'd like to receive it because of supply versus demand issues in the industry. So that's more of what that cross-staffing is. We're not moving tools and supplies, we're moving personnel, and we're moving personal protective equipment. It adds a minute or so or two in some cases, particularly when a person has to move that equipment throughout the fire station. So.
and this is probably both of you, can we speak to, excuse me, can we speak to the, sorry, I lost my thought. Yeah, you go ahead, Jonathan. It'll come back. I'm sorry.
Would it be beneficial to have, since we are spread out, at least on the western end, maybe less expensive resupply points? You know, maybe mobile tankers that are ready to go, truck and pull up, haul them, and also on the EMS side, like maybe a less expensive. I don't know what the term would be, less critical, like hospital transport vehicles that, like, say an ambulance heads out to a EMS call, it's not as urgent, and another van could take that patient to the hospital and free up the ambulance.
Well, I mean, that is certainly, we'll start with the fire question first, and I'll go into the ambulance. And I may have Chief Watkins can come up and talk with us more about that as well, because he oversees emergency medical services in the county. The tanker concept, we are putting tankers in the west in the county that have, they carry more water, because it is in the more rural area of the county and where there are no fire hydrants. Both Company 4 and Company 6 have a new tanker on order. Each of those tankers, one will haul 2,500 gallons of water, and the other one is being built to haul 3,000 gallons of water. So to your point, those vehicles also have pumps, and they're very capable units. Of course, when you start speccing out a vehicle of that type, it adds a lot to the size and the weight of the vehicle, so in the maneuverability. So we certainly need the engines to get into the driveways, and we'll need the tankers to come in and support the engines with more water. Engines also carry water, but more closer to 750,000 gallons.
Well, not just tankers, I mean just tanks in general, like just,
Oh.
that tanker doesn't
Okay.
necessarily have to go back to the fire station.
So we have, so in the county, that's a good question, Mr. Christie. In the county, we have over 65 dry hydrants in the county. Some of those are in the east end, but the majority of those in the central and the western part of the county. And the dry hydrants are in the ponds. And so it just takes a fire engine to go to the pond and draft and vacuum the water out of the pond to be able to fill the other fire engines so they can be closer to the fire scene to take the water back and forth. We have a subdivision ordinance where when a subdivision is built and there's more than 11 homes in it, then at that point they have to have a water supply on site. Occasionally, there's a pond, part of that subdivision, where it could meet that need, where we could put a dry hydrant in. The pond's over a certain amount of acres, we may require 2. But if there is no pond, then what we do is we require an underground water tank or a cistern. And right now, that's a 10,000-gallon cistern. But you see those constructed anywhere from 10 to 30,000 gallons. So that's already in our subdivision ordinance. And the dry hydrants. Just so happens that every year about this time, we have a vendor that comes in that goes into the ponds with a diver. They inspect the dry hydrants to make sure the sediment hasn't caused any problem, and we make sure that those dry hydrants are in good condition. And so we use those and rely on those all the time. That's a good question. As far as EMS goes, you know, the vehicles, I'll speak to the vehicles. We're in a very dangerous profession. We buy quality vehicles that have the latest safety features on them, supplemental restraint airbags, harnesses, seat belt systems. The type of ambulance that we purchase is the leader in the industry. They have a proprietary system of those types of devices. You know, we want to make sure that our personnel are protected as best they can be. We've had some incidents on the interstate where ambulances have been involved in accidents, and we've been real fortunate that, you know, we had some injuries, but we didn't have those serious injuries. As far as prioritizing calls to go to send possibly a resource out to handle maybe a public service call that isn't tying up an ambulance, that could also be looked at. I'm just going to ask Chief Watkins just to talk to you a little bit about the prioritizing of EMS calls and what that could look like. But again, we don't always know what we're going to or what we're going to find on the scene. So until we can be sure that it's that type of situation. Chief, you want to mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, and on that, what I meant was, maybe transferring a patient. Like if like a broken arm where nobody's
Yes, sir,
going to
but a
die.
broken arm would classify as a 911 emergency. Or excuse me, we were only dispatched through 911, so we really don't get into sorting through, what you're referring to as some home health type things like that. We occasionally get called into stuff like that, and what we do is act as our patient's advocate. If the person needs to go to the hospital, we transport them to the hospital. But the only time we're summoned is through 911. The challenge would be finding somebody to come transfer that patient to, particularly in the rural areas. We are oftentimes called by private ambulance services to assist them in getting patients into the home when they bring somebody home, for example. When you look at our larger call generators, they're calling us sometimes because they haven't been able to get anyone else to come out. The EMD, the priority one call, is our highest acuity. We get the information from dispatch and we modify our response accordingly. A priority one call needs an ambulance and the first due fire company. A priority two call needs an advanced life support provider and the transport unit. Occasionally we do what's called a priority four call, which is non-emergency, and sometimes those are just lift assist. Those are the easy ones. We go there, we pick the patient up, and we don't necessarily transport them to the hospital. We don't try to do unnecessary transports, and we do address things like with our significant call generators.
And, oftentimes EMS is the first gateway into healthcare. And, folks who can't get to the healthcare they need, they'll call 911. And we see as a industry and as a profession that we are doing, every day we're doing more things that resemble home health care. And that's the nature of the business and the way things are changing. The industry, mobile integrated healthcare, some folks have coined that as paramedicine, or some departments have personnel who do those duties. They may go out and do wellness checks. They may help assist citizens with their medications or making doctor's appointments, or call on a citizen who we've determined needs more assistance than probably is appropriate for the 911 system. We're not there yet with that. We do pieces of that because we do what's required for our citizens. We try to deliver the best possible service, but until we can get all of our fundamental bases covered, I don't think it would be wise to expand into mobile integrated healthcare as an organization. But in the meantime, we continue to do all we can do to work in concert with Department of Social Services, Goochland Cares, and folks that work with them so that we can provide the services our citizens need. Many times it may not be an emergency. Maybe that was your point. If I missed it, I apologize.
If I may very quickly, our crews are oftentimes out in the community, and our basic unit is that ambulance. So when we go on a smoke detector install, oftentimes it's the ambulance that goes and does that. When somebody needs to be picked up, it's the ambulance, because most likely, based on that 80% or 70%, they're going to need to be on that ambulance. So the challenge becomes when you're out on the ambulance and then the fire call comes in, particularly in the rural areas where you have to make the judgment, is it better to take the ambulance straight to the scene, or do you need to go back and get their proper fire equipment? And that's where the balancing act and the decision tree can be very complicated.
It's ironic that I totally lost my thought, and it was related to communications. Could you speak to communications a little bit? And my thought is, a lot of this that we're talking about budget-wise seems to be focused on, triage. Let's get the issue addressed as quickly as possible, find the right solution, and I know communications improvements are part of the budget, and I think that first response, it is first response of all things, would be critically important and, hopefully streamline a lot of other processes down the road. If you could speak to that.
Absolutely. Just to be sure, are you speaking to the Emergency Communications Center, or are you
Yes.
speaking
Yes.
to just Fire Department communications in general?
I'm speaking to
Right.
every first call we get in the fire
Right.
and rescue
Well,
area.
I'm here to tell you that the Emergency Communications Center that works under the sheriff does a superb job, an excellent job. The sheriff and the chief and the major do a great job in managing the Emergency Communications Center. instituted emergency medical dispatch in 2019, and that was a huge help to the types of calls that we respond to. We get more information, better information, and we are able to help triage those, or at least place those calls into a certain priority so that we know how to best respond, which vehicles need to go, whether we go lights and sirens and that type of thing. I'll tell you that the sheriff has worked hard to build that infrastructure to make sure that we have the right number of public safety radio tower sites throughout the county, as well as the equipment and personnel that he needs in the Emergency Communications Center to continue that forward progress and improvement. I'll tell you that the data that we looked at in the report was produced between 2018 and 2022, that 5-year period. And we have made great strides of progress since then to be able to get those calls processing times back down, fire calls just under a minute or right at a minute, and emergency medical calls the same way. Mr. McCutcheon asked about pre-alerts, and I want to tell you how we operate with some of the pre-alerts that we do. If an emergency medical call comes in, they immediately dispatch that call, so the wheels are turning. And then they continue to keep the caller online, and they ask the questions that they need to know to be able to put that call in the right order, the right priority, and we may either add to those resources based on that information, or we may take away or decrease the resources if we decide it's a low acuity, low priority call. And so, like many things, the master plan was started in January of 2023. And honestly, some of the data in the master plan was fed by our existing CAD system. I know you know we need a new CAD system, and it made it a little difficult to work with some of the data. Some of the data we were looking for, we couldn't use because we weren't sure. And in other cases, we looked at it closely to make sure that we had the right view on the data. So like the communications piece, the call processing piece, we've made great strides with that, and those times are down to about a minute or less. And I can tell you that we see that with our calls, and we look at those, and then we get into turnout time, and that's on us. The time that we have to react to get the wheels turning. And so that goes back to the cross-staffing and being able to be ready to go on that call, have the fire stations in position, ways to get to the apparatus bays. Certainly, we don't have the opportunity to redesign every fire station, but anyone that we build going forward, we need to look at those floor plans. We need to make sure we have clear routes of travel from the living areas straight out to the apparatus bays so that we can move in that direction quickly.
I just want a clarification. It seems to me I read in here that perhaps you were recommending that we split off the communications and have separate. Was that in here or not?
I don't think that was in there.
Anyway, from here you say that with enhancements
Yeah.
under the sheriff's department, that's much better now than it was when this data was accumulated or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, lots of progress have been made in that area, as well as other areas in the master plan. If you look at the master plan, and we can't show the whole document here today because it's over 200 pages, there's a paragraph that follows most sections, and it starts off by saying, subsequent to the visit by Dynamex Consulting, this has occurred, or this is happening. And that leads me to the next part here is the next steps. Of the 44 recommendations, we have already started working, or maybe they were already started working on even before the master plan to address some of those. And what I was able to provide you today in a written format, I know time is going to be too tight to go into it on the screen, but it gives you some idea of those recommendations, where we are with that. Yes, sir, that's right. And that's a very, very rough, raw, quickly put together document because it's all a work in progress. And many of those recommendations have already been addressed. I'll give you an example. One is the recruitment and retention piece for volunteers. Mr. McCutcheon says volunteerism is down nationwide. We know that to be true, too. Since the master plan started, we received a FEMA SAFER grant for volunteer recruitment and retention. It gives us over $100,000 a year to work on volunteer recruitment and retention. And we hired a volunteer recruitment and retention coordinator who works for us part-time being paid for by the grant funding from FEMA. So that's an example of one of those recommendations. When they first visited, it wasn't here. It's a reasonable thing. I'm glad he put it in there because it also lets me know that we're on the right path. And many of the recommendations, or several of the recommendations we've addressed in the budget process. Some of the full-time positions, the recommendations for the full-time positions, you know what? We enjoy a low tax rate here, and we do a lot with our money. And I live here too, and respectful of that. And so instead of asking for a full-time position, we eased our way into it, and we've requested a part-time position to cover some of those areas. For example, the part-time deputy fire rescue chief, the part-time fire life safety educator, and an assistant or a part-time person to assist with logistics operations. So these are just some examples of things that we've done, and you can take a look at that crosswalk table that we produced that I thought you might want to take and digest as to, Mr. Lal, you asked for that the first day you saw the master plan. Can you tell us what you've already done or what you're working on and how it aligns with the recommendations? So, and we're still working on that table, by the way, so if you see, because it changes by the day because of the forward progress that we're making, so.
Are we, still in the question mode and are we sort of wrapping up or what?
I think there's one slide left.
Okay, well, I will tell you, looking at this, I mean, it's like taking a master's degree in public safety. It's very educational and I appreciate it. And I, being new, I sort of almost panicked or got overwhelmed. How in the world can we do all this with the resources we've got? And then I realized we're going to phase this in.
Right.
We're not going to go out here and create 3 new fire stations in the next budget or staff up to 5 in the next budget and that type of thing. So I'm sure you're establishing priorities. Is this in a priority list or fashion or just a list? And so that's what I'd like to see. I know you've probably worked on it.
Right.
So I don't mean to imply that you don't.
I think, and Mr. McCutcheon can answer, and next, we can just flip to the next slide if you want to go there, Stuart, would probably be the thing to do. But I think those recommendations kind of appear in the order they appear in the plan itself as opposed to, obviously I could go through there and we could prioritize some, but I can also tell you that we are a progress-motivated organization, and we're working on many of those because we know they're needed. We're your fire rescue leadership, and we know that they're also needed, and we're already working on that. And bringing in, Mr. McCutcheon and his team to take a look at things for us gives us another view from the outside, just to help you understand where we think we are. And certainly I'll let him talk about the strategic plan.
Thank you. And before I forget, we had a recommendation in there about volunteers, and we kind of danced off of it. The volunteers are very important to Goochland, even our single cert folks. Not everybody needs to be an interior firefighter. The association owns 5 of the 6 fire stations. They're the charitable arm of the department, so they can receive donations. There's a lot of work that volunteers can do within the fire rescue that doesn't necessarily include throwing an air pack on and going into a burning building. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that before we got too far off track, because I came myself out of combination departments. They are a vital part of the organization. But with that said, to answer your question, I started with this, and I'm closing with it. So a strategic plan, and this is where we lay out. Let's say, I've been in these processes where they go, we want to hire 100 people tomorrow. So that's great, but who's going to train them? Where are we going to put them? Who's going to supervise them? Where are we going to get the people to promote to go to these places? And how do we fill the holes to get those people there? And what we end up landing on is we've got to get a plan in place. There's got to be motion on the front end to pull the weight in on the back end. And somebody has to think through these things. And that's that strategic planning process, whether you do it internally or you bring somebody in to facilitate it. But you have different representatives from county administration, finance, fire rescue, community, supervisors. So that way everybody's more or less on the same page, and we can discuss some of those items and then get that plan in place so then we know. So maybe we do want to work towards having individual staffing on an engine and an ambulance staffed at each station. Well, we probably can't wave our magic wand and make it happen tomorrow. It may take 3 to 5 years to get there. But as part of the planning process, we can identify that, and then it's clear and transparent for everyone to see what the game plan is. Something may happen, it may push it off. Something may happen, it may speed it up. But we've got a plan in place and general timelines. And so with that, that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you all so much for your time today. Sorry we went a little bit long with it, but I think the questions are where the magic happens in these processes, and answering y'all's questions and making sure that you leave with a level of comfort that you have an understanding of what the next steps are and where we're at today and why we're suggesting some of the things we're suggesting. And so with that, I'll stand for any final questions.
Mr. McCutcheon, the biggest thing that I take from any survey is where's the model? And so, I mean, there are people who've done this before. We don't need to recreate the wheel. Who has done this exceptionally well? And why are we not, I mean, that's what I want to be following and saying, okay, who's a rural environment? Who's got some growing suburban area? Who's got this? So it doesn't feel like we're trying to restart things, but we're going and visiting that place and saying, okay, these are the 10 things we love, and these are the 3 things we could do without, and it's consistently getting better. That's what I'm challenged in seeing. I mean, I would just love you to say Topeka, Kansas has the best darn rural fire department there is, and I hope that's something we can get.
So I think the biggest thing is every community is different. I mean, we could take town A, which is identical in size and scope and everything else to town B, and they could be drastically different in city services. They could have some demographic differences that drive some different things. I think it's a local thing. We could look at other folks. I mean, we could look at Loudoun County and go, hey, Loudoun County volunteers on most of the stations. You hit, what is that route?
I want to use that reference in this building.
Route 15. Well, how about New Kent County? New Kent County, very similar to y'all, are cross-staffing units, and they went to full staffing on their engines and ambulances maybe 2-3 years ago. Same issue y'all were having. They determined that they could improve their performance and their outcomes by staffing an engine and an ambulance at each station. And it took them a couple of years to get there, but they got there. They're just on the other side of Richmond. But I think, again, you really want to make this a local issue. We can look at other folks, but just because somebody that's similar to us did it one way doesn't necessarily mean that's the right way for us. We can probably take some ideas, but I really think listening to our folks and taking their input's the most important part.
So this may touch on a couple of points, but how far off are we from being like a training destination for firefighters?
You mean like folks come and get a job and go hop somewhere else?
So in the military, we had specialized training where each unit would send 1 or 2 individuals, receive that specialized training, and they would become an instructor. So, for a fire station. Are there counties or localities that do that? And
Yeah.
If there's not many, considering we have a river, we have 2 highways, we have rural and we have residential, how far off would we be from becoming one of those?
I think I defer to one of the chiefs. What I will say is this, collective bargaining agreements a lot of times will be the barrier there.
Okay.
That's not Joel's problem here,
Yeah,
but
we're
when
fortunate
you're
with
looking
that.
outside, that CBA is going to be the barrier there for other departments.
So I think what I hear you saying, Mr. Christie, is maybe, can we deliver our own training? Do we have instructors?
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
I meant for other localities.
Okay.
Like to basically increase recruitment, but us be the standard.
Like being a center of excellence that
Right.
others would look to us in certain areas where we excel compared to others.
Right.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and while we always strive for continuous improvement, in many cases, Goochland County Fire Rescue, we have led that effort among other jurisdictions like us in a lot of ways. We have a lot to be proud of. We have a good organization. And people do come here to receive their training. We do have a fire training center. We are making improvements to the fire training center. We have this, we know we need a larger fire training center in the future. But I'll give you the most recent example I can tell you is that we are the lead agency in a regional fire academy that contains students from both Louisa and also Hanover, volunteers. And there are 23 students in that regional fire training center that we're hosting here in Goochland. And they also travel to those other jurisdictions for some of the physical training that's done. But we have folks who come here and take classes. We work with the Virginia Department of Fire Programs to host classes, and then we deliver classes of our own. We just finished an EMT class, and how many were from the outside of the EMT class? 4 from Powhatan? Yeah, so I mean, we are and always have been an organization that folks could come here for training. Now, we go to other organizations for training too, because it's important that you find the right balance with that so that you can see what other organizations are doing and keep all that training fresh. And Chief Watkins runs the training division in conjunction with Captain Profit, and I would just ask him to maybe expand on that.
I think the thing that you're looking at is you have to create a culture where people want to come to work, want to work here, want to work for Goochland, and some of that is being inspirational, providing the good training, providing motivation. People who want to be busy without being ridiculously busy. They want to be use their skills, and I think that's an important thing when you look at retaining people. It's your culture and how you treat people and how they come to work and feel like they're doing. They come to the station as a volunteer, and I was always, when I was a volunteer, I was always kind of disappointed when I didn't get to do a call or two or something like that. That's part of what makes people want to do this line of work, and it's service. So.
Chief, I'll just mention and give you a compliment. I know you're running a training program for the ag community here next month, I guess it is.
We're going to try, yes, sir.
And I so appreciate you keeping the agricultural community and safety in that. That's one of the highest danger industries out there. So thank you for your efforts on that.
Well, you're welcome, and we recognize that Goochland still agriculture, #1 industry, right, in the county. And we recognize that in the county. And so having farm safety classes and having classes that teach us how to handle the farm machinery if a person is caught in it or trapped, or knowing what the hazards are on the farm is important. And it's just something that we want to bring back. We used to conduct those classes on a regular basis. And in conjunction with the Virginia Association of Volunteer Rescue Squads, we hope to have a weekend program like that in April, mid-April. And I think it'll be well attended. We had folks who went to Blacksburg last year to Virginia Tech to one of those programs, and we've got some who want to go back this year to the advanced program, and certainly our own program. But we couldn't do that without the Virginia Farm Bureau and the farmers who are willing to make their people and equipment and property available for us to come out and train on. Silos, for example, are extremely dangerous. Some are oxygen and limiting silos that you see, the blue harvester silos, for example. So you have to be careful with that type of thing. So thank you, sir.
Is this document public? It's a public document, is that on?
It's not out online yet. Honestly, one of the recommendations was that the board should consider it first, and you all should be able to decide if that's where it needs to be. We have provided it to all of our fire rescue members. All of our board members, of course, have it. And at this point, I think that's the next step, is to be able to, for you all to decide what you think of the document and whether you want to adopt some of it or all of it. And then at that point, we could make it available, to the public. It's a very informative, educational document.
I
So.
think it is very informative, and although it has recommendations, I think you read this, you realize that we've got a great fire and rescue department operation here that we should all be proud of. And certainly it can be improved upon.
Absolutely.
And I just, I'm very thankful that y'all were able to put that fire out. You know, that when y'all dispatched all that equipment to this building, whenever it was.
Absolutely. We caught the right sunset and everything, right? Yeah. Well, I think that's really, and Mr. Carpenter can speak to it. I think I'll let him speak to where it goes from here, so.
And Mr. Winfrey, there's no problems with it going online for the public to see. It'd be important that it be stressed that this is a plan, that this is not a, as has been pointed out, the next steps would be to determine where we go with it. So we would want to make sure that the people don't see it and believe that it is something the board has adopted. The board has received it as of today, so it's a public document, so there's no reason that it can't be and shouldn't be available. We just need to make clear to our public that the board has received this, and it's a document for them to use and consider, just like y'all will be doing.
Yeah, and that would be my, I guess, ask or recommend or suggestion that the board accept the document. So we're not adopting it saying this is what's going to happen, but accept the document, it's happened and we have it. The information's there and available, and then use that information for decision-making in the future.
And I think it's also a great reference document that has excellent recommendations in it. Again, it's another outside source, another opinion, so to speak, of Goochland County Fire Rescue. And I think it'll be important to us if we're going to embark on a strategic plan to know that the board sees validity in the document so that we can build that strategic plan to spring off of the fire rescue master plan. And then we can talk about those performance measures and tripwires, and when we start to need to add additional resources going forward in a more strategic plan that will drill down deeper into some of the recommendations and so forth. But again, I would just say that, you know, your fire rescue leadership team here in Goochland is knowledgeable, and we certainly have a good sense of direction about us, and we are going to move this organization forward, and we're going to take this document into consideration as a reference document. And I think this board and previous boards have been pro-public safety, and that's what we have going for us here in Goochland, in addition to the great men and women that we have volunteering and working for us in the county that can make things happen. And so we'll take all of that and we'll keep moving the organization forward, and we'll bring forth our recommendations as we see it. We know the organization possibly better based on the fact that we're here every day, and we certainly also have outside experience as well than just here in Goochland. So,
There are no further questions? Excuse me. Yes, sir.
Chief Ferguson, how long have the staff had this document? You know, you mentioned you shared it.
Right. So you know, this was a long process. I learned a lot in the process because it took a long time. And it was site visits and meetings and surveys and all sorts of things. So we started doing technical edits, I guess you would say, formatting in the document in the late fall. And then we wrapped it up in December, and it went to the Board of Supervisors from there. And I believe we put it out to our fire rescue members in mid-January. Maybe it was the beginning of January, but certainly no later than mid-January. And we sent it out to all of our members, which is over 300 people. And so they have the PDF, they have a link to the PDF version of this document that's on the member section of the fire rescue website. So we've all had it open within our organization for at least the last 30 days.
Yeah, I mean, the key point I wanted to make is, and you stressed it, is you all are the front line. You know what we're dealing with.
Right.
I just, you know, that type of feedback to me is invaluable.
Right. I'll tell you, you know, over the years, we've had different assessments done of the organization, not very regular, but over the years we did, and certainly we've learned something from each of those. And by far, this is the most comprehensive and the most elaborate, and that document will certainly give you, if you pick that document up and you start to read it, you'll learn not only about where we are today, but there's a section in there about the history of the organization, where we came from, and that's important, as well as where we're going to try to go to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, if there are no other questions, we'll adjourn to our 3 p.m. Regular board meeting.
Mr. Chair, board members, Mr. Administrator, thank you so much.
Thank you to Dynamics and also to our fire and rescue team who are invaluable to the county. Take care.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah.